Okay, so good evening, everyone. I hope you can see the slides okay. And as you know, we're going to spend an evening with me, Emanuela Borgatta, and Gabriele D'Annunzio tonight. I am an Italian teacher and published author. I I hope I can call myself a D'Annunzio scholar. I have been studying his figure and his importance in the Italian culture for almost 30 years now, which tells you how old I am. And after a few years writing articles about him, I decided I had enough material to go a little bit more in detail about certain aspects of his life, certain misconceptions about his life and his importance in the Italian politics and history, as well as his literature. Which was very varied. D'Annunzio used to be one of the most prominent literary figures at the turn of the centuries. And so, as you can see here in the first slide, I chose two different pictures for you. On the top left, there is the let's say Dante D'Annunzio, who was very well known during his period as, a bit of a womanizer, always having the best times, very luxurious cars and wonderful houses. Whereas on the right, possibly that is the D'Annunzio that is more well known these days as the soldier, the politician, the man of action. I think when I was contacted by Lorraine and when we started talking about tonight, the first thing that I noticed is that she knew about the man of action, possibly more than the man of letters. And I guess this is something that is slowly but surely changing with time. I hope so. I am not a historian. My studies are more about art and literature. So I like D'Annunzio also to be remembered, not just for what he did during the First World War, but also for his very varied career. So off we go with the first slide I'm going to share with you tonight is a quote, very famous. D'Annunzio was very famous for his magnificent use of the language, the Italian language, but not only, because he also wrote in French. He had to, I said he had to live in France for a few years, and then I'll tell you why. So he also mastered that language, and by the end of his life could write was bilingual and could write in both, but he was also very good with the English language, as I will say afterwards. So this one, life is a work of magic eluding the reflection of reason. The richer it is, the more it recedes from it, implemented by concealment, often going against the order of gain laws. I like it very much. This is one of the many quotes about D'Annunzio that you can also find online, and feel free to browse afterwards. He invented many words as well that we still use in the Italian language. And he was also very fond of creating mottos, not just for himself, but he used them. He's in papers, for example, to send letters, and you can find them in his house, which is still possible to visit, and I will tell you about it afterwards. And so he had a very he thought that the language was something very flexible, that he could sort of mold, had his own taste, and for his own purposes, let's see. Magic here and going against the order of gain laws are not chosen by mistake. D'Annunzio lived a life that he himself called impossible to imitate, quite extraordinary still to these days. And he also went against given laws as far as the language was concerned, because his language was very musical. The translators had a hard time translating from Italian into English, into French, into German, because not only because it is very difficult if you think about it, when you have a very lyrical prose, very musical prose, it is almost impossible to translate it to a different language, but also because D'Annunzio was very verbal about what he didn't like in his translated works. So it was not easy to please him, let's put it like that. But what we have now are sometimes quite interesting translations of his work. Okay, so here is a very brief biography. Again, I am very glad that D'Annunzio doesn't give us a hard time in trying to find photographs of his, because he loved to be photographed. He lived his life knowing that he would be remembered, and he did our best to leave us photographs, documents, books, very well organized libraries of his works. The picture you can see on the left was taken by Mario Núñez Valls. I am almost sure some of you know him. He was a very famous international photographer at the time. And D'Annunzio invited him when he was living in Florence to take these pictures of him. You can see wonderfully dressed, reading, and you would always see him with his profile. He thought he was very nice. He had a very nice profile, and so he liked to show it. And the key points that I wrote on the right are very just key points, but he did he lived in so many different places and did so many wonderful things that it was almost impossible to try and summarize, but I tried to do my best. D'Annunzio was born in the Abruzzi region, and he wrote from anything from poems to novels to theater plays. He started very young. The first poetical works were published when he was still attending secondary school. And he then lived in Rome, Naples, in Venice, in Florence, in France, as I said before, and finally on Lake Garda. He's very famous, I think, because he led an army, the Arditi army in Fiume during the First World War. And after that, he wasn't particularly happy about the way it went, and so he sort of retired to the Vittoriale, which was his final home on Lake Garda. And he's known still to these days as the Italian Vate, which is the most important poet laureate that we have ever had. It's nice to tell you maybe that he said that to himself first, and so we still agree with him. He was one of the most important Italian poets, if not the most important Italian poets. He lived, as you can see at the top, from 1863 till 1938, which was a reasonable good age for the time. And I am going to show you a little bit of his extraordinary life, starting from his birthplace in Pescara in the Abruzzi region, as I said before. The house is, you can still visit it. It's open to the public. It is very well preserved. Not everything you can see inside is original. Some of the furniture was robbed. Some other was damaged during the wars, and so. But what you can see now now is very well preserved. I chose just a couple of rooms. The first one that you can see on the left was the living room. And I chose it because it's the room that you enter the house from. And it's not a coincidence. It is chosen because this is the room that he entered the last time that he visited his mother before she died. And so you are sort of following the same path when you enter that he did that day. D'Annunzio had a very strong bond with his mother. He used to say that she was the most important woman in his life. I guess this makes him a little bit typically Italian, but she inspired many of the works and the poetical works that he wrote. And so I chose on the left her bedroom. You can see her portrait just behind the bed, and this is the bed isn't original, unfortunately, but it was placed in the exact correct way because they did have paintings of the house. And so what you see is a perfect reproduction. I didn't make a mistake, if you go back to the left, to share a sandwich picture underneath the living room. Why? Because as I told you before, he invented many words in Italian, and these are very peculiar sandwiches, very typical of the region I am from. I am from Piedmont in northern Italy, and I come from Turin. These specific sandwiches were invented in my city, and they were called the American way because they were sort of imported by a couple of bar owners in Turin. They liked them very much when they were in the United States, and so they decided to present them to the Italian people. But D'Annunzio wasn't particularly happy about the name when he visited Turin, and the bar, which is still open and still serves these magnificent sandwiches. So he decided to call them tramezzino, which means in the middle. And they're placed here because, as you can see, they remind, their shape reminds of the ceiling of his house in Pescara, which is the tramezzo is a very typical way to build. It was a very typical way to build roofs in the past, and so because they reminded him of Pescara, he decided to give them this specific name, and we still call them like that these days. This is just an example of the many words that he invented. On the right, again, I decided to share a picture of his mother's tomb, which is literally around the corner in Pescara. If you are visiting his house, it's around the corner, and it's the most important church in Pescara. You cannot miss it. It's the biggest one in the city center. D'Annunzio decided to a simple tomb wasn't enough for his mother, so he decided to create this magnificent mausoleum for her. And I'm not sure my picture gives you the exact beauty of the tomb as it is. It is not completely visible. There is a gate which is almost always closed, but if you have the chance to go to Pescara, it is certainly worth the visit because it's absolutely fantastic. So, and it gives you, of course, the idea of how important his mother was for his life. So we are now going to I guess it's still his most important book. Certainly it is the first novel that he wrote. It was published in any possible language I can think about. It was called Il Piacere in Italian, and in English, in the first translation was very much abridged, very much cut, and so if you buy Child of Pleasure that you can see with the yellow cover on the left, you're not actually reading what D'Annunzio wanted, unfortunately. And he knew that. He absolutely went against this translation, but still up to just a few years ago, it was the only English translation that you could read about it. Thankfully, it was translated again recently, and it is published, as you can see, by Penguin. And also the recent translator decided to keep the original title. It's not Child of Pleasure, which was sort of taken from the French translation, which was L'Enfant de Volupté. Now the English new translation is called simply Pleasure, as the original work. It is important in D'Annunzio's career because it is considered as the beginning of decadent literature here in Italy. I'm not sure we can still say that, but certainly it is linked to two other works which were very important at the time. As you can see, they are on the right. One was published in 1884 in France, and it is A Rebours by Huysmans. A very key novel for the period, and was also followed in 1890 by The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I'm sure needs no introduction, by Oscar Wilde. And The Picture of Dorian Gray was published just a year after. Oscar Wilde is a huge influence on D'Annunzio. He has been throughout his life, but we could say that there is one person that sort of inspired all the three books, and it's on the top left. I'm sure many people have already recognized him. It is Count Robert de Montesquieu. And here he was depicted by Giovanni Boldini in a very famous painting of his. He was a very good friend of D'Annunzio, and his extraordinary way of life, his magnificent palace, the Paleros, was an inspiration also in later years of his life, in the way that he would, furnish his house and the way he would choose what to put inside. For this reason, I chose to share with you a picture on the left of a very small part of D'Annunzio's wardrobe, which is, I guess, quite unique. I have never seen anything similar. It is a museum now. Inside his house, there were so many clothes to share that at the very beginning, they were all just kept inside all the different wardrobes in the house, and then they decided to create a museum specifically for them. So you can see, his jackets and all the different colors and shoes and boots that he wore. Just to tell you that for D'Annunzio, the literature was not an art per se. He tried to use music, art, and literature and politics all together in one big work of art. And so this is the reason why for the excellent taste that he also had in clothes. The description of which you can also find in Pleasure. And so if you haven't already, I highly recommend the new translation. So to have an idea of what was like to be sort of an Italian dandy at the time. Let's put it like that. Okay. And here instead, I thought that tonight it was important to underline the link that D'Annunzio had for Dante Gabriele Rossetti. I call them the two Gabriels in my life because I spend a lot of time with them both. But of course, again, as you probably know, Dante Gabriele Rossetti was also from the Abruzzi region. And you can still find a study center in Vasto. So another very nice place to visit if you're interested in the subject. But D'Annunzio didn't really know the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood when it was created. He discovered that sort of 30 years after the movement was created in 1848. He discovered it because he read an article, simple as that, by a very famous Italian British literature expert, and I am going to share with you a couple of abstract of the article afterwards. But there are two paintings in particular by Rossetti that I am sharing with you tonight because they were two very different sources of inspiration for D'Annunzio. One is on the left, and it's Beata Beatrix, which Dante Gabriele painted in 1872, and the other one bottom right is Lady Lilith, which Dante Gabriele painted in 1873. They were the two starting points, I would say, in D'Annunzio's love for the Pre-Raphaelites and his specific research into the Pre-Raphaelite world. And I would say the key inspiration for a book that you can see on the right. It was called Isotta, Gutta d'Auro ed altre poesie. It was, of course, a book of poems, very pre-Raphaelite in content, very pre-Raphaelite in language, and very pre-Raphaelite in the choice of illustrations. Imagine that in Italy, it wasn't like in Britain, where you were, I guess, more used at the end of the 19th century to have illustrated books for children, for adults. In Italy, not really. And so Isotta was sort of saluted as something very new. D'Annunzio was very well known for being a pioneer in what he did, and so he did this time as well. He published it almost by himself. He chose the painters to work with, and in the end, Isotta was published in 1886 in 1,500 copies. Some of them are still around. But here, I decided, of course, to share just two illustrations because they were directly linked. One to Beata Beatrix, you can see it on the left, by Giulio Aristide Sartorio. Sartorio, I am certain it's not news to you because you know the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood very well. He's still considered to be the Italian pre-Raphaelite painter, but he discovered Dante Gabriele Rossetti thanks to D'Annunzio. And so this is sort of, let's say, his way to celebrate it by creating an illustration for D'Annunzio's book about the exact moment. As you can see, Beatrice sort of appears to Dante Alighieri, and she's in this wonderful white light. She is a vision, of course, more than a human being. It is different than the Beata Beatrix that was imagined by Dante Gabriele, but still Dante Gabriele is the main source of influence for Sartorio. On the right, instead, another painter, Giuseppe Cellini, decided to illustrate a poem by D'Annunzio called Lady Clara. And here, I think the idea is to keep Lady Lilith hair, but the gaze is something completely different. But you still have sort of, the symbols, the flowers, and so the atmosphere is pre-Raphaelite, which was something almost unknown in Italy at the time. Here I shared with you the original article by Enrico Nencioni. As I told you before, D'Annunzio read an article which was very interesting for him. And so he decided to discover more about the Pre-Raphaelites. So here is what it said about Lady Lilith. The white-clad Lady Lilith is seated before the mirror, combing the mass of gold of her magnificent hair. She has an indifferent air, resting in the quiet contemplation of her perfect beauty. Her somewhat languid eyes have no passion in their gaze, and her imperial forehead is smooth as alabaster. She knows that beauty such as hers equals genius and strength, truth and virtue. It knows itself to be all-powerful. She is enraptured by her perfection. She is the siren, the sorceress, the triumphant Venus. So I can easily imagine that these were very captivating words for D'Annunzio at the time. He was 20-something after all. And here's what Nencioni said about Beata Beatrix instead. Is the Virgin consoled by tragic sentiment, by the mystical ecstasies of an ideal passion? Her body is exhausted and life seems to have taken refuge in her heart. Fainting and dying, she appears to Dante in a twilight light. The abundant volume of her hair makes the pallor and exhaustion of her face stand out even more. From above descends a fantastic bird carrying in its beak the funeral flower of sleep. From the balcony, one can glimpse a tremulous light of Florence, already close to being widowed by her angel. It is the real Beatrice Portinari, the lady from Florence, loved and sung about by Dante Alighieri, who speaks to our hearts in this painting by Rossetti. And so D'Annunzio not only was he inspired by these words, but we also know from certain documents that he also tried to copy some of Rossetti's works. Unfortunately, we don't have any documentation about it, but D'Annunzio was a reasonably good painter, and I would have loved to see them, but that's a shame. We don't have them. What he saw as well during the Fine Arts exhibition in Rome in 1883, on the left you can see the cover of the catalogue, was a painting by Sir Lawrence Almaa Tadema, which he confuses a little bit because, as I said before, he didn't really know what Pre-Raphaelitism was or who were the members of the Brotherhood. And so he confuses a little bit Almaa Tadema for one of them. But we do have some art pages that he wrote for many newspapers he collaborated with. And at the exhibition, he was particularly impressed by the painting that you can see on the right, which is the Sculpture Gallery by Almaa Tadema. It was depicted in 1874. And then I read what he wrote about it, which is wonderful, I think. And in the middle of the painting, you can see Almaa Tadema's second wife, Teresa. And before we go back to the Roses of Heliogabalus, I would like to read what he said about it for you. He said, the figure of a goddess I would like to have before me painted on a strip of ivory, tall, straight, in a rosy robe that suggests nudity. She seems to have leapt out of a marvelous piece of alabaster. She's radiant. The pure head, the pure mouth, the pure eyes rise as if in a kind of flaming nimbus. The serene enjoyment of contemplating a work of art animates her face. She gazes, resting her hand on the head of a young boy. A sway of abandonment invades her, an unknown vibration disturbs her. As you can see, I think these words by D'Annunzio are very similar to what Enrico Nencioni said before about Rossetti. I guess he tried to copy that style that caught his attention so much. But still, I guess what you have, even if it is the English translation, not the Italian words, something deeper, even deeper than what Nencioni said. You can still read all of his articles about art in a book which is called Art Pages, unfortunately not translated into English, but some abstracts are online, and if you like, you can contact me afterwards and I will direct you towards them. Going back a little bit, I just wanted to tell you the reason why I share the Roses of Heliogabalus with you. Of course, he didn't see it in 1883 because it was depicted a few years afterwards. I am 100% sure he never saw it in person either. But later in his life, he knew it. D'Annunzio attributed a very symbolic meaning to roses, and so he used them in his poetry, and he knew about the sort of, the Roses of Heliogabalus by Almaa Tadima is not just the wonderful painting that we see. It has a very cruel, very dramatic history behind it, and it was sort of taken as a source of inspiration afterwards when D'Annunzio decided to use the roses with different symbols and different meanings inside his poetry and his works of art. So here, I decided to share, as promised, I decided to share with you some of the connections that I shared in my second book. Because there is a misconception, and I don't really know why, but I guess it is because he lived in Italy and France, maybe, that D'Annunzio wasn't so keen or not so interested in British culture. Quite the opposite. He really was. Even if he came to Britain only once for a coursing race. He was very much, as you can see in the first picture on the left, very much into dogs, and so he just came to Britain once, and he stayed in Liverpool and London. But he liked the country very much. Also because for a period in his life he was partnered with Eleonora Duse, who was if not the most important actress of her time, one of the three most important actors, together with Ellen Terry and Sarah Bernard. So he knew about the country, and he knew about its culture also through her and through her works, which were very famous across the channel. He was very good friends with Francesco Tosti, who was, again, like him, from the Abruzzi region, but he moved to London when he was very young, and he became a music maestro for Queen Victoria. And so I guess he was at the time much more well known in Britain than D'Annunzio was. The connection with Rossetti, which we have just shared, but also with Radcliffe Hall, for example, and her partner Una. He met them during his final years at the Vittoriale, and I was very pleased I could share in my book the only letter that he sent to them for the first time. He wrote to them in French because I think he was being a little bit lazy because by the time if I remember correctly, the letter was written in 1934. So 4 years before he died, he was already fluent in English. And so I'm sure he just wrote to her in French because he wanted to be 100% sure it wouldn't be misunderstood. He was very keen in British poetry. He knew Shelley and the Romantics very well. He was also very interested in what John Ruskin had to say about art, and his works about Venice and architecture. Ruskin, I think, was the sort of the channel, the way that he had to access all that art that he couldn't see in person. Let's put it like that. And then at the end, I also included Lord Leighton, but this is just because they had one friend in common, Italian painter Nino Costa. Nino Costa is at the center of a very nice biography written about him by Olivia Rossetti Agresti, William Michael's wife. And Lord Leighton, as we know, has a magnificent house in London that you can still visit, which in my opinion is very similar to D'Annunzio's final house. And so I always try to convince people that if you go to London and you see Lord Leighton's house, then you should come to Lake Garda and see D'Annunzio's house as well, and vice versa, because they are two very similar experiences, and I highly recommend both. So what I try to do with the books I have written and I'm still writing, the new one is out in May, and is to plan a series of books which were written towards a new perspective of the poet, so his connections, as I said before, his love for the arts, and to sort of concentrate on lost documents. D'Annunzio wrote and received something like 300 letters a day. So you can imagine what it means for somebody who studies him to find all these documents in all the different archives all over the world. And of course, there are still some private owners. Some of them pop up on eBay from time to time. And it's a never-ending work. I always say that my life isn't enough, but any D'Annunzio scholar can tell you the same. Our single lives aren't enough to study the subject, and that's what makes him so fascinating, in my opinion. The locations here, at the bottom right, I chose a picture of the Britannia Hotel in Liverpool because it is, as I told you before, the only place that he visited in Britain, and I had the privilege of seeing it as well last summer. And so it was very nice to see this splendid room, which is still, as far as I could see from the past illustrations, still more or less the same as it was when he visited it in 1914. So here we are, finally. This is the Vittoriale degli Italiani, his final home. But as you can see from the pictures, to call it a home, it's a bit reductive. It is a small village. And here you have the sort of global view of the house on the top left, and then you have just the house itself on the top right, and then you have the map of everything you can see once you visited at Gardone Riviera. It isn't directly on Lake Garda. It is in sort of solitary place. D'Annunzio didn't particularly like the idea of having neighbors around. So when he bought the house in 1921, he decided to create the perfect, let's say, museum for himself. He already knew that he wanted to create something great, not just for himself, but for the Italian population in general, and for future visitors as well. So here you can find very varied spots to visit. You can see his grave, you can see his house, you can see the amphitheater that he created. There is a small museum dedicated to his clothes, as we said before, a small museum, not so small really, dedicated to his war years, a museum dedicated to the architect that helped him create the Vittoriale. He bought it, as you can see on the right, from art historian Henry Tode, who was a German art historian, and part of the library is that belonged to Tode is still visible. D'Annunzio decided to keep his books together with his, and although he redesigned it completely when Tode was the owner of the Vittoriale, it was just a small villa. He redesigned it completely with architect Giancarlo Maroni and the artist Renato Brozzi. And then a few years before he died, he decided to donate it to the Italian people with everything that's inside. So what you can see now is the Vittoriale as it is the day he died. Nothing has been touched, nothing has been changed. It is exactly the same as as it was on the 1st of March 1938, the night he died, which makes it, I think, quite unique worldwide. And of course, it went through some years of oblivion after the Second World War. The Italian state was undecided whether to keep it open or not. It is, as you can imagine, very demanding to keep going. But in recent years, especially thankfully to a very enlightened president called Giordano Bruno Guerri. He is very well known internationally. He sort of started an operation called the Reconquest, because what he wants to do is to try to recreate all those spots that D'Annunzio thought about with Maroni and Brozzi, the way they were in the original plans. D'Annunzio died before all these plans were finished. And so now, year after year, the Vittoriale changes. And so what I recommend also is, not, if you have the chance, not to come just once, because if you have the opportunity, it's really always a work in progress. So I'm going to show you a little bit inside the Vittoriale. I'm just showing you a few rooms, partly not to spoil it, of course, even if it is impossible. I must confess, the pictures do not do justice to the interiors and to all the over 10,000 objects that are inside the house. But here you can have an idea if you have never visited it before. We start from number 1 on the left. That is the Kelly room. The Kelly is the turtle that you can see in the highlighted in the first picture. It was a real turtle, but it died of indigestion. And it was D'Annunzio was very fond of animals, so he decided to keep it anyway, and he asked his the artist that was working for him to sort of decorate it in order to keep it. And it is a way to tell people also not to eat too much. This was the dining room, otherwise you would end like her. It is a warning. Then we have number 2. This is the relic room. D'Annunzio wasn't particularly interested in design, in sort of famous design, but he liked to keep the objects that were of particular importance for himself. And the one that I have highlighted is the will that Sir Henry Seagrave was using when he died. He was about to break the world record on a speedboat, but he died on that very spot. D'Annunzio sort of see it as a very heroic gesture, supernatural gesture. So this will has always been very important for him, and it is placed at the very center of the room for that reason. Then we have number 3. I mentioned it before. This is the Globe room, and also it was also his library, where he also kept Tode's books, and I decided to share a picture on the right of it by Adolfo De Carolis. It is Dante Alighieri, and Dante was a source, one of the major sources of inspiration for D'Annunzio, as well as for Dante Gabriele Rossetti, as you certainly know. But for D'Annunzio, he was also something more. He considered him as his relative. And so Michelangelo and Dante for D'Annunzio were members of his family. He thought that his genius was equal to theirs. I agree. It is debatable, but I agree. Number 4, instead, this is a very nice room. It's a little studio just outside the bedroom. The arrow that you can see is to point at the piece of paper and the glasses, because this is the place where he died of a stroke on the night of the 1st of March, 1938. As I said, it is untouched, and so are the piece of paper and the glasses. When he died, D'Annunzio was working on the biography of Saint Catherine. Number 5, instead, it's the entrance, the hall, very narrow. It's not just a picture, it is very narrow. It sort of gives you an idea that you are entering a holy place. And so if you were a welcome guest, you would immediately go on the right. If you weren't a so welcome guest, you would go on the left, and you would just wait for D'Annunzio to be ready, or sometimes not, to receive you. He had this very theatrical way sometimes to deal with guests. Number 6, believe it or not, it's the blue bathroom. And I told you there are over 10,000 objects at the Vittoriale. Here, you can find over 3,000. Just to give you an idea of how many there are. I'm sure you can guess by the picture. Number 6, I placed the number there because the ceramics that you can see, they are the same that are also used in certain rooms of the Leighton House, as far as I know. So it's exactly the same blue. Number 7, instead, it's on the right, and it's the biggest picture because this was his sacred room. It was the room where he created his works of art. Unfortunately, you cannot see the entrance, but when if you visit the Vittoriale, you will notice that it is very small entrance, and you sort of have to kneel down to enter because you're actually kneeling to his genius and to his phenomenal works of art. I have also put the letter A near a statue that you can see on the left. This is a statue of the head of Eleonora Duse. Eleonora Duse, especially during the last years of his life, was the woman that he remembered more often, and a love that he regretted throughout his life. He didn't treat her very well. And so he kept this very nice sculpture, but he kept it veiled because it was so beautiful in his opinion that he got distracted by her beauty while he was creating. So it is still covered by that veil nowadays. Okay, so we go towards, I guess, yes, the last slide. These are my books. The one that I told you about mainly tonight is the one that you have on the right, D'Annunzio Connessioni d'Oltremanica, D'Annunzio Cross-Channel Connections. It follows a first study about D'Annunzio that you can see on the left, which was called Tracce Piemontesi. It was related to the region I live in, the Piedmont region in Italy. And I also decided to show you a little notebook on the top left that I have recently published with pictures of paintings by Dante Gabriele and also quotes. And on the left, you can also see another painting, which is going to be the cover of my next book. And this time we will follow D'Annunzio in the main cities that he visited. So Venice, Florence. We're also going to France together. So maybe next year we will talk about it. Okay, that's it. And there I am again, I hope.